All right, so welcome back to Happy Hour with Heather and Guest. I'm Andrew. I'm joined by Dan Sullivan. Uh, Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And we are here to discuss a release that came out yesterday from your
Right.
latest project under the name Nad Navillus,
Mhm.
which off mic, Dan and I were talking about how it took me longer than I thought it should have to recognize that Nad Navillus was his name backwards, Dan Sullivan.
That's correct. Yeah, I started uh, when I was a kid. I would sign artwork, Nad Navillus. I just thought it sounded cool, and then I probably did my first recording project as Nad Navillus when I was in college, and then after college, it kind of actually blossomed into something more established. So it's just something I've been using more or less my entire life uh, for artistic purposes. And then also I own a business called Navillus Woodworks, and so we build commercial millwork and furniture and stuff like that. So the name has stuck, shall we say?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of I guess before they were Van Halen,
Uh-huh.
they were called Mammoth,
That's right. Yeah.
and the rumor I guess is that David Lee Roth said, your last name would be Van Halen would be a great name for a band, uh,
Uh-huh.
and then I guess that just took on. I guess people obviously know that there are members with that last name, but
Yes, of
uh,
course. And
it
then they
takes
probably resented David for the rest of their career for that
sure,
suggestion.
but I mean it works.
Hmm.
And it was interesting for me because I was on Google being like, what is is a Nablus? And there,
Uh-huh.
believe it or not, there are I guess Nablus is a term. So there are and I was like, oh, I'll feel so prepared, I'll bring this up.
Uh-huh.
Nablus means this, am I right? And
Uh-huh.
then of course realizing fortunately right before we started talking about it that
Well, obviously there's more than one Dan Sullivan out there, and in fact I've met Dan Sullivans who also realize that Nad Navillus is kind of a cool sounding inversion of their name. And there was a giant development company in New York called Navillus, which I think is under indictment right now for fraud or something like that. So no
gotcha.
connection there, obviously.
Yeah,
Hmm.
if you look up any of Dan's work
Hmm.
under Nad Navillus and you see any kind of litigation, that's a separate entity all entirely.
That's right. Yeah, it's I have them separated. They're shell corporations.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Well, that's good. It's good. You got to take care of business.
Got to fund this somehow.
Sure. Well,
Mhm.
speaking of business, Forgotten Portraits is the latest album. It was released yesterday. There's going to be a release show and a CD launch at the Montrose Saloon in Chicago on June 14th. So
Correct.
if you happen to be in the Chicago area, I would recommend you go check it out. Um, I listened to the album this morning because I wanted it to be fresh in my mind. And it was difficult to sort of articulate because, well, I'll just say the songs were composed around poems.
That's correct.
So you had the poems first, that was going to be the lyrics, and then you wrote the music to sort of fit what you thought the the poems needed.
Yeah, I think it wasn't quite that clear, the dividing line down the center of the project. I started writing music around like probably December 2020, and just picked up a copy of Poetry Magazine that was sitting there next to me. I mean, it really um, was that circumstantial, and was looking for words and started reading through this latest issue and was immediately grabbed by what I read. And then I think one of the songs, maybe it was Leroy Went North, or Gambler's Remorse. It was one or the other of those Devon Terrell poems. Just immediately stuck to some music that I was writing, and I was like, "Wow, that was easy. I didn't expect that to work so well." And so then at that point, I started considering it as a device by which to write more music. And then pretty quickly, I thought, hey, I could make a whole collection of songs. Um, and so at that point, I was reading the poems, looking for things that I thought would actually translate well into songs. and of course noodling on the guitar as I always do, and finding ideas that I thought might work well with words. And so the hybrid happened rather organically at a certain point once it started to gain some momentum.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it didn't. It's one of those happy coincidences where it seemed like everything came together.
Thank
You
you.
know,
Yeah.
it certainly didn't seem like when I didn't know the genesis of the album until after
Mm,
I'd started listening to it.
mm.
Um, and I'm blanking on the singer's name. Um, he was Mark Kozelek. That's
Uh-huh.
what it reminded me a lot of some of his solo work.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but it was there because the genre, you know, going into it, I was expecting it to be more okay. Well, these songs are sort of going to all be similar in terms of the music, but
Mm.
they're really different. There was a blues.
Hmm.
The second track I think was very bluesy.
Third track. Yep.
Um,
Hmm. That's
the
old
third,
songs. Yep. Hmm.
yeah. So that was really cool because it all the songs are unique to the poems or all the
Mm.
lyrics.
Mm.
You know, it's not simply like you were following a formula,
That's
which
definitely by design. Yeah.
yeah, which I thought was
Yeah.
really cool.
Oh, thank you.
And it's really accessible. Like I when I discover music that I can share with anyone,
Mm.
you know, regardless of what their favorites are, it's
Hmm.
always a win for me.
Hmm. Oh, cool.
So um, yeah, so I'm looking forward to being able to. And the other thing I noticed that I thought was really cool is 50% of the sales are going to be donated to the Bard Prison Initiative.
That's right. Yeah. So the collection of poems was guest edited for Poetry Foundation magazine, and it's all incarcerated people or people directly affected by incarceration. And so that is the theme of that issue. And so all of the poems in this collection of songs do carry that theme through the record. And so, you know, this is a collaborative piece of work. Obviously, I am using the words of others. I did receive permission of all of these authors. The Poetry Foundation facilitated that, and very thankful for that. And obviously, I couldn't put this out if I hadn't received that permission. But it seemed fitting that therefore that the proceeds be split accordingly. So,
Yeah, well, it was just
mm,
it sounds like a very cool project,
thank you.
just in terms of the concept of it, and it delivers. It
Mm,
really is a great album,
thank
um,
you.
and it remind I a friend of mine who's a musician named Dr. Israel. He does like reggae and dub stuff,
Cool.
and he was part of a project called Die Jim Crow,
Mm,
which is it's a similar. I guess they try to put out music of people who are incarcerated, also
mm,
draw attention to their situations.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
now it's become a label. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so that was really cool that you sort of managed to involve, um, you know, collaborating like this.
Well,
Uh,
maybe after the interview, you could share his contact information with me.
sure,
Yeah,
sure, absolutely.
thank you. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so how would you best describe the album to some, you know, if someone was looking for to broaden their horizons, how would you pitch this, would you say?
Well, I'd start by explaining the concept as we just described it. That you know the songs are written around poems that I sourced from Poetry Magazine, and they all do address incarceration. I am a guitar player. I think as a musician, that's sort of the identity that I'm most comfortable with. You know, I sing as well, of course. So there's definitely a guitar focus to it. You know, that is the tool by which I write the songs, and so I think you'll notice that that is a pretty constant there throughout the record. I appreciate what you say about there being a diversity of approaches and sounds between the songs. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Beatles' White Album and Led Zeppelin 3, and you know, those are obviously older records. There's plenty of stuff now, but you know, from song to song on those records, it's like you don't necessarily know what you're going to get, and and I really like that approach where I feel like the song is its own world, but hopefully it also connects with the other songs on the record. Uh,
Yeah, I would. Well, I would say there's certainly a through line.
mhm,
It doesn't sound
right.
like you're being eclectic for the sake of variety.
Mhm,
Um, the song structures might be different, and
mhm,
the genre. You may say, oh, this has more of a bluesy feel to it.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, it all belongs together. It's all a
mhm.
cohesive thing.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, it's that's the one thing that I was really trying my hardest to come up with. Like, how would I describe this in one? It's difficult to sort of articulate. I mean, the concept is there, and
Right.
once you explain the concept, it begins to make sense.
Mhm,
But I couldn't just find an umbrella term with
mhm,
which to like lump it all. It's not
mhm.
one specific thing.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I would say if I tell people it's sort of folk based or folk rock or indie rock, I think any of those, that umbrella, the music fits in any one of those camps, sort of broadly. My voice is what it is. It's a sort of tenor reaching into or it's a baritone reaching into a tenor. I sing all the songs. Obviously, that's going to be a glue there that connects everything together. Um, uh, yeah, I think that within there, if you went and saw us live, it's gonna come across like a folk rock show. There's parts where it's a little louder and we stretch out the songs. There's parts where it's certainly much more intimate, and uh, we want to have that experience from one song to the next, where it's like there's a palpable anger to this one song. Thinking of Greed as a song that really sort of channels that anger that you feel in the poem. And then there's another song like Leroy Went North, which is sort of like a confessional. And then there's the title track Forgotten Portraits, which I think is much more of a meditation, in a sense, and has kind of this almost progressive rock type of figure going underneath it, where it's this sort of existing between two different time signatures at the same time. Um,
yeah, I think one thing that I think I may have gotten this from Bandcamp.
hmm,
Equal parts guitar and vocal driven,
mm-hmm,
sonically and structurally diverse.
yes.
And I was sort of willing to just let that be the description.
I,
Um,
I think something that's worth mentioning is in a couple cases, I slightly rearrange the poems in order to give them more of a song-like structure. So, for instance, Gambler's Remorse, which is the last one on the record, I repeat a certain stanza uh, as if it would be done in a song, right? If you're reading a poem, oftentimes it depends on the poem, of course, but it's not going to be structured verse, chorus, or whatever, something that's more conventional in songwriting. And so I took a little bit of liberties with the poems in that sense in order to make them sound more like songs. And that is the case, Forgotten Portraits. I took the last stanza and I started the song with that stanza, and then I repeated again at the end, and sort of that gives it these bookends that I think helps sort of make it more of a song. So there's a few examples of that. My brother's asking for stamps or Leroy Went North. Those are pretty much exactly as written. They're straight through.
yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a certain amount of changes that need to happen to make it work
Right.
like you said, to make it work as a song.
Yeah.
And what's really great is that you've managed to make this a collaborative effort that really works well as its own project.
Thank you.
Um, so yeah, I would now. Obviously, the album is out. It's been available since yesterday. There's
Correct.
going to be a CD launch and release show on the 14th. Do you have plans to continue to play live, to tour? What's next up on the agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. The Nad Navillus as a musical project have been dormant for some years. I released two records on Jaguar in the early 2000s. And then since then, musically, I've been focused on another group called Arriver, which is an arty metal band that I have with my brother and a couple other guys. And so in the pandemic, it made sense for me to try and channel my musical compulsion into something that I could do in my house. And if I was going to collaborate, I could do it remotely, as opposed to, this heavy metal band, which really needs to sort of exist in the practice space together. All of this is to say that I have a lot more flexibility in terms of where I go and with whom I make this music. In Chicago, I do have a band. I love to play shows with those guys, but I did just play in New York a little while ago as a solo concert. So that flexibility will allow me to tour a little bit. Probably, I think it's more accurate to call it just playing shows out of town. So I'll be doing a bit of that here and there, and certainly continuing to play in Chicago and Chicagoland regularly. This show on the 14th is the completion of a residency that I did at the Montrose Saloon, a second Wednesday's residency from February. So that's been a regular thing through the winter and into the spring. I booked the other bands that are playing every night with me. So continuing to find those opportunities for sure.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, it's a wonderful album just to listen to, but I could really see it being a phenomenal show as it's performed.
Mm-hmm.
So I look for, if you make it out to the East, I'm in Virginia.
Oh, nice.
You'll have to let me know if you're going to be playing like in DC, for example.
I think Silver Spring, Maryland is a spot where I'll be setting up a show. My brother Andy he's a musician as well, and he lives in Silver Spring, and he was talking about setting up a living room concert that he knows people who do that sort of a series, and that would be something that would work particularly well for this, I think. I will for sure let you know.
Please. Yeah, that would be great. And if people want to find Nad, it's just on social media at Nad Navillus.
On Instagram, it's Navillus Guitars. So that's, one word, Navillus Guitars. And on there, you'll find certainly everything about Nad Navillus and upcoming shows and this and that. Also, some posts about my band Arriver. And I build guitars as well as a hobby. And so you'll see some pictures of, guitar things in process. So it's more than just talking about this project. It's sort of all kind of music things for my life.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you've got a lot of irons in the fire. That's awesome. So yeah, I would say first, check out this project, Forgotten Portraits. It's definitely worth your time. It's already been out for release. If you're in the Midwest and you want to go to the launch party, it's at Montrose Saloon on the 14th. But be on the lookout for other out-of-town shows. I'm excited to see where you continue to go with this. I feel like this is just the beginning, really, of the potential of what you can do with with this project. So, and now that I know that Nad Navillus is Dan Sullivan backwards, I feel much more comfortable about where I'm at. But, anyway, yeah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and congratulations. It's a great album. Pick it up, Forgotten Portraits, and good luck with everything in the future.
Cheers. Thank you.
Sure.